All right, friends. Welcome back. And let me uh, get this going. So, our last activity really gets students to look at that share. Really is getting students to stop and think about incentives and what are the incentives behind different decisions that are being made? And this is such a fun activity to do with students. I happened to do this when I had some administrators observing my classroom, and we may have been talking about incentives in the school, and it may have gone down south really, really fast. And needless to say, my administrators got a very rude awakening that if you're going to punish students for being tardy to class but not skipping class, all of a sudden you're going to have skips go up a lot, and they wasn't fully thought through. But students thought through it, and that was a very fun observation that I had. But we know that incentives are rewards and penalties that influence our behavior. And so when we think about economies, market economies let prices become the incentive, right? We let that price tell us like, oh, the price of eggs is really, really, really high. I guess I'm no longer going to go and egg my friend's car or egg my friend's house. I'm just not going to do that. Or, oh, the price of toilet paper is really, really high. But when we're in somewhere like the Soviet Union or in a controlled economy, prices don't change with market forces, and firms couldn't keep the profits. And so prices and profits aren't incentives like they are for us in more of a market style economy. And so here is how this next activity is going to work. In this next activity, we're going to put you into some breakout rooms. Debbie, I think 8 breakout rooms again on this one will do. We're going to put you into some breakout rooms. And in those breakout rooms, your group is going to read through some really weird incentives that were going on in the Soviet Union and try and identify, well, what was the incentive that in the absence of something like market prices that operated in the production and sale of goods and services in the Soviet Union? Then you're going to use the recognition of those incentives to explain behavior that would otherwise seems really strange and really illogical. Other things your group may want to be thinking about is who is the decision maker? What incentives does the decision maker face? And how is this behavior the same as and different from the behavior that we would expect as a result of the incentives that might operate in, say, a market-based economy? So when we put you in your groups, you're going to have someone that's going to go through the guide, and I'm going to share the document here in just a second. But your group is going to go through, read through the scenario. Your discussion leader will use some of the questions to guide your dialogue. Think about who the decision maker in your document is, what incentives are faced, how is that behavior the same, or how is it different from, say, what we would expect as a market-based economy. And then have someone in your group who is a little bit more tech savvy to type into your Google document, and then also have someone who is going to present, because I'm going to leave some time for us to present. So if we think about, let me close this, oops, and let me pull up the activity document. So very similar to the last one is that whatever breakout room number is, that's the group number you're going to operate on the Google Doc. So if you're breakout room 1, you're going to use the group 1 document. If you're breakout room 2, you're going to use the group 2 document. I know I saw that because so many of you were on the document at the exact same time, it was a little bit slower. Unfortunately, I didn't have the time to try and like break these up into separate documents, and that'd get really messy to try and share different documents across. But this is where I'm just going to kind of just jump right in there. So so you'll read through the scenario. We're giving you some clues in here, and then think about some of these questions here that you've got. So like predict on the basis on which the quote of the lamp factory was set. Maybe change the quote and consider what behavior might change as a result. So I think there's a couple different scenarios that are rolling around in here. So let me stop my share. Before we send you to breakout room land, let me put the document here. So there's the document in the group chat. This is a really fun economic mystery. Looks like everyone has access. Are there any questions anyone has for me before we send you to some breakout rooms? All right, so we're probably going to give you about 15 minutes or so to work. And then we'll take 10 minutes or so to bring you back in and discuss collectively what you guys found. All right. And I'll pop around to some breakout rooms throughout. But Debbie, I think we're good to go ahead and send them into their breakout rooms. All right. Give everyone a second to come back in. Got to hear a lot of interesting discussion that you guys had. It was a fun activity to do also. All right, so let me share your document. All right, so let's start with group one. So someone in group one, it doesn't look like all your names populated up here, but that's okay. Someone in group one, you guys have this scenario where Professor Judy Thornton of the University of Washington was in Moscow, as a student in Moscow, and she noted that the small blue metal lamp on the desk was so heavy that it took two people to lift it, and the lamp had been filled with lead. The problem of grossly heavy products was not limited to the lamp industry, however, as Professor Thornton tells of a cartoon that appeared in the publication Crocodile. I'm probably saying that wrong. A popular weekly magazine in which the entire staff of a plant is shown carrying a single giant nail out of the factory. So, someone from Group One, tell us what were some of the things that you learned. What was the quota? I can read this, but I'd like for you guys to share. So I've got it on the screen for everyone to see. So I'll let someone in Group One share a little bit with us.
I was part of group one, but the ladies were probably better spoken than I am. The analogy I was using was the classic glass with the USSR. They were paid by the weight of the glass, and then eventually the glass or the window was so thick it was deemed useless. So the Politburo, the government, figured out what to produce, how to produce for whom, and they completely changed the rules to the game. And then windows became so thin that a small pebble would shatter it, and then the end product was deemed useless. So with that logic, we were looking at the lamp and how heavy it was, and then the size, and then the light bulbs, and that created disequilibrium. And so the other alternative in a market-based economy would allow a private business to figure out what to produce, how to produce for whom, to alleviate disequilibrium that was created by the government. So that was group one, but if anyone wants to jump in, please.
Anyone else from Group One want to throw anything else out there with it? Sean, I think that's a really great, analogy that you went with, and then you kind of said, well, so they decided to change it and go with this target, and so what problems did that create? Well, little small flying rock is now going to shatter it, right? And so this becomes kind of a lot of the problems that you start to get into is as you start to change these output targets, how is that starting to impact behavior of producers and likewise consumers on the other end of it, right? And so you start getting all of this mismatched stuff in an economy that really doesn't make all that much sense. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Let's jump down to group number 7. So group number 7, this was going to be Valerie, Amy, Philip, and Emily. So you guys had scenario 2, and there were a couple of groups that had scenario 2. In their book Meltdown Inside the Soviet Economy, authors Paul Craig Roberts and Karen LaFollette report on the seemingly mysterious propensity of the Soviet geologists for drilling many shallow holes rather than a smaller number of deep holes. Since most of the oil deposits lie at a relatively deep level, it's not surprising that Soviet geological expeditions in the Republic of Kazakhstan have not discovered valuable oil deposits in many years. The surprising fact is that they were considered successful. The geologists and ministers are paid handsomely for their efforts. Everyone goes out and gets drunk, and no one cares that the whole exercise has been an extraordinary waste of time and money. So, someone from group 7, what were some things that you found with this? You guys got a lot on your document, so share out what you guys thought.
Well, I'll start out. Everything looked great. I mean, on paper, they were drilling a massive amount of holes. They were drilling speed was fast. Their production reports looked great. You know, we got this many holes. We got this much production. This much drilling speed is really fast because they're not going very deep. So on paper, it all looked great. So they'd get through, and as the article said, they'd just go party and have a good time. However, um, they weren't the problems with it. They weren't producing. So in number 2, you ask us if we were the. I can't read it.
If you were the minister in charge of oil production, how would you change the system to create an
Yeah, well,
incentive?
they need to increase. Well, the amount they need to increase drilling deeper. They need to increase their holes, decrease their holes. Instead, go deeper and produce more product with fewer holes. Um, and then I need to go get my glasses. And then that's pretty much it. Go deeper and produce more oil. So the bad, the perverse outcomes of that, over extraction of resources, um, from the government standpoint anyway, and neglecting long-term exploration.
Yeah, and that's all of those are
On
really
paper they look great, but they weren't producing their enough oil. They weren't getting the oil that they needed. They were just, it looked great on paper, and then they'd go home and do whatever they needed to do.
yeah. And I think when I was listening on group 2, because group 2 had this same scenario, and I think I heard someone in group 2 said like, hey, like the quota is going to be number of holes drilled, so like we're going to make sure we hit our quota, and then like we're packing up and calling it a day.
Right.
I think that's really really good. And I even like, what are some of those perverse outcomes? I think you guys hit it on the head with this. You could get the over extraction, resource depletion. There could also be the fear of producers of drilling deeper if you don't know if there's actually oil when you get there, because now you've used all of those resources, and so you could get some reluctance on producers to actually drill any deeper. So good job, good job, good job. Let's come up to group 3. So group 3, you guys had, I am not going to read this entire thing, but the question that you guys were dealing with is, why doesn't anyone produce spare parts? So someone in group 3, what did you guys find out?
Well, our speculation was that the quota was basically incentivizing production of actual tractors, not tractor parts. And so as long as the tractors were being produced, nobody was worrying about whether it was, whether it was going to run anywhere past, the day that it's built, right? So yeah, so we kind of figured, well, that's not a very useful situation at all. And so I'm just trying to get back to the actual, what do we come up with? Yeah, so basically the other thing is that the second question dealt with the idea of, well, why wasn't anybody setting up a quota for spare parts? Well, it's probably even as far as the production ministers go, like it's not exciting, it's not splashy to produce screws and nuts and stuff like that. Whereas if you can get good press from good tractor numbers, right? And yeah, and then we talked about how could you fix it? Well, our concern was that the psychology actually might not be there, right? That the system is so ingrained that whether we're not sure if there would actually be an effective way to increase production. I mean, you could potentially make it tied to the amount of hours that the tractor runs or something like that. But then you get tractors sitting in the field, just running for the sake of running.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I like that you said in there, like, producing spare parts isn't nearly as exciting as saying, look at this new tractor that we have built. Ignore the broken tractor off in the distance. Ignore that we don't have the spare parts to fix and deal with that. But look at this brand new tractor that we have built. Yeah, I think it's great. And then even thinking, you know, how you set that production target of like, oh, if we wanted a tractor that's going to run, you know, longer, well, now all you're going to do is you're going to get tractors that just sit out there running and not actually doing anything. So, yeah, I think well done on thinking through kind of some of those perverse incentives. The last group here, group number 4. So this is the scenario that I love to use in my classroom when I do this activity. I use the group 4 scenario. Mandy, Richard, Chastity, John, and Stephanie. We had this really interesting scenario about a showy dedication of new buildings, but along the way, we found out that, I'm trying to find the sentence here, the committee came and had to inspect every single apartment, and you had someone who took the committee to every single floor to show them, and they took them into every single bathroom to show them every bathtub in there, and yet as they moved up from floor to floor, is all of a sudden bathtubs from one floor were being removed and being put on another floor. So someone in group 4, what's going on here?
So what's happening is that they pretty much had enough supplies for 2 floors, first floor, second floor. And while they were on the second floor, they were then removing the bathrooms from the bathtubs from the first floor, installing them up onto the third floor. Then when they get to the third floor, getting those rooms showed, then they would take the bathtubs out of the second floor, put them on the fourth floor. And this was done because there was a shortage of bathtubs. And this shortage would impede on the showiness, what is expected, why they were here, the purpose of the building. Look, we're doing a great job. And the fear of potential consequence, retaliation from their superiors, the inspectors they weren't stupid. They knew what was going on, but they had to keep the show up because of the overall picture, the overall image of being successful, being productive, being progressive. And then the workers, they just did what they had to go. They just did what they did simply because their jobs were dependent on it. If they, refused, they could get replaced easily in this market.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, so if we think maybe, and I don't think this was maybe a direct question on your guys, but what's the output target? Well, apartments completed, and in order for an apartment to be considered finished and completed, it needed to have a bathtub. Now, once you've checked off that the apartment has the bathtub, like that apartment is good, and let's keep going, right? So there's not this huge incentive, but the question I love to ask my students with this is, okay, this is going on, and yet people are still moving into these apartments knowing that, like, I might get an apartment that doesn't have a bathtub. I may get an apartment that is complete according to the government, but maybe not complete according to what my mind might think. And so then I like to just ask students, like, why would anyone even move into an apartment where it's not fully complete? And students are generally quick to go, well, it's probably better than whatever they're currently living in. And so that's why they're going to choose to move into this apartment. So this is another really, really great activity. I don't use this in its entirety in my class. This for me is a warm up when I'm talking about incentives. I only actually use this first one because I just think it's the most fascinating one, and it gets students to really think about a lot of different aspects. But this is another just great way for students to stop and think about not only what are incentives, but what are perverse incentives that get created. And you can take it in so many directions. It's something that I think about when I run my class is like, hey, if I do this, what incentive am I creating? Like I said, I happened to run this one time in its entirety with my administration doing an observation. And we were talking about school incentives, and we were talking about our policy for skipping versus our policy for tardy. And they were like, well, we don't understand why I'm going to get in-school suspension if I'm tardy to your class and have 4 tardies, but if I skip your class, nothing happens to me. And I just remember sitting there as they're talking about this, and I just looked at my administration in the back of the room, and I just smiled at them, because even my students could pick up on, like, there's a lot of perverse incentives going on, and the policies next semester. So I believe that my students are credited for getting a policy that makes a little bit more sense. So I love this activity. Lots of ways to get students to think critically about a lot of different issues. So Malhaz, I believe you've got the last lecture in store for us. Sorry that I took 5 more minutes of your time.
Okay.
FTE will bill accordingly.
That's okay. No, that's great. Well,